Hello and welcome to Dinis Guarda YouTube podcast series powered by openbusinesscouncil.org, citiesabc.com, and fashionabc.org. Once again, here we are in the new year, 2023, talking with the leading personalities changing our world, and as well how we can actually cope better in our cities, our businesses, how we can actually deal with technology, how we can actually better, I would say, create narratives that help us understanding what is around us. And this being a YouTube podcast series about people first, and second about narratives and how we deal with business and technology and with all of us first as people. So we're very excited. This year we're going to actually grow quite significant our YouTube channel and podcast with a lot of good partnerships coming, interviews with ministers and a lot of different personalities. But one of the things for me is people that are the ones writing our narrative, and authors and books is one of my first passions. And as well, I think the most important thing, I would say that reading books for me is one of the things that makes me mental and wellness, but as well that actually helps me understanding better. And each time I read, I find new areas. So I welcome to our series Phil Barden, that has a fantastic profile in different areas. And we're going to be talking about his last book, but just as a summary of his achievements and as well biography that you're going to be seeing here behind whatever platform you're reading. There will be always a bio, but as well in our different platforms in Open Business Council, there will be a wiki about Phil. But well, Phil Barden is an author, speaker, and consultant in the fields of marketing, innovation, and customer experience, with over 2 decades of experience, including senior roles in some of the biggest corporations in the world, like Unilever, Diageo, and Deutsche Telekom. He has been redesigning a lot of ways how we actually code and decode our marketing and our digital journeys, and as well our business journey and e-commerce journey. Actually, his last book is Decode, and you're going to be speaking Decoded, and you're going to be speaking about that today. So Philip is the founder of Decode Marketing Limited, that he created in 2010, that combines hands-on, pragmatic, client-side brand management experience with leading-edge cognitive and social psychology, neuroscience, and behavioral economics to provide analytical and predictive power, and where we can leverage the science and digital to increase sales. And the agency was awarded the Most Inspiring and Provocative in the Unilever Foods Fusion Awards. And some of the different achievements is precisely working with some of the leading brands in the world. So Phil is the author of Decoded, the science of why we buy, which I think it's a key element for anyone in business and technology. And in this book shares his latest research on the motivations behind consumers' choice and what happens in the human brain as buyers make their decisions. And the book was published by Wiley, which we actually have been quite highlighting this, and we'll be as well having a separate note on books as ABC. As well, Phil has been contributing to a lot of other books and publications, and for instance, in ETO Greens, a compilation of papers inspired in the genuine advances in marketing science, and as well, he's been involved in terms of a lot of different things in terms of areas of education and coaching for big corporations. So he has quite a lot of education in these areas, which we're going to be talking from various international MBAs and MSc programs, or has been actually presenting his work, and he's regularly invited to speak in big industry events, and as well as a fellow of the Marketing Society. So Phil, I could go through a lot of more things, but welcome to our series. It's a pleasure and honor to have you here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Philip, I'm particularly interested to, so as someone that has been on this industry for a long time, and at the moment, your book is quite, what I love, and as well all the research around you is that you have a component of practicality, but as well a component of research and a component of science. So a bit of your history. So how did you came back to be who you are now, and as well from probably from an education to career, and as well to right now being as well an author?
Yeah, thanks. So I was born and grew up and educated in the UK. And when I went to college, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So I studied business studies, which was quite a wide-ranging subject, but it included marketing. And when I'd been at school, I'd been very influenced by one of my friends who was determined right from the age of 16 or 17 to go into advertising. And he inspired me with the whole creative process. And he did go into advertising. In fact, he is still a creative director, very successful creative director. And I knew that marketing was somehow linked to advertising. And when I was at college and studying marketing, I got more and more interested in this. In particular, the whole process, the whole idea that you were creating something that people would want. And the business challenge side of that is to do it at a profit, and to do it sustainably in a way that would generate revenue, not just once, but repeatedly over time. And the more I studied marketing, the more I became interested in it, and finally decided that's what I wanted to do. So that's how I got into marketing. The course I did was very helpful because it was a 4-year course, and the first 3 years was split between college and working. And to get on that course, you had to be sponsored by a company who guaranteed you these work placements. And I was sponsored by a company called United Biscuits, which is now Pladis International. And they offered me 3 6-month placements. So I spent 6 months in a biscuit factory, actually making biscuits, and then 6 months on the road selling biscuits, and then 6 months in the marketing department, and then went back to college for my final year. And then I knew, having had that experience, that I really did want to get into marketing. So that's how I ended up starting a career as a marketing trainee. And that was, I spent 25 years in marketing, mostly with Unilever in the UK, but also in Central and Eastern Europe. And that was a hugely exciting time after the Berlin Wall came down and all the markets opened up. And then Diageo, and then T-Mobile, where I worked with a former Unilever colleague. And it was a very different business, of course, being a service business rather than a product business. But all the while, my passion, my motivation has been trying to understand what people want, what makes them behave in the way they do, and how, as a business, you can serve them with a product or a service that they desire and that will make money for the company.
Oh, that's impressive, and especially the big brands that you've been involved in, very big positions. So let me ask you as well from the beginning. So when you were studying, and I think that's one thing that I want to touch. So marketing is quite a new task. If you look at the history of the 20th century, is mostly the last 100 years, and even the last 100 years, the last 50, that there's been a discipline as sophisticated as we have now, and especially if you look at consumer behavior, is even more recent. So from this education, I think people like you and me, we keep educating ourselves, but most of this is not available in universities unless you are for business education and MBAs or things like that. So from that experience and the education that you had before, and you mentioned the biscuits organization, which is an interesting case study because you learn really a lot of things that I'm sure changed a lot of your career. So this level between theory and practice is critical. So how did it change your career in terms of these relationships that you've been building, both career and research?
I think well, one of the biggest challenges I ever faced in my career was actually in my last client role when I was VP for the T-Mobile brand in Europe. I had to relaunch and reposition the brand, and I'd commissioned some very expensive, time-consuming research in 10 European countries, and the results just didn't make sense. And this was a big problem for me personally, because I'd persuaded the business to invest a significant amount of money in this research. And that puzzled me because right throughout my career, I had been on the receiving end of the wisdom of the industry. So effectively growing up in Unilever, I was trained in a certain way. I did the diploma of the Market Research Society in the UK, which taught me certain ways of doing things. And I assumed, because that's how everybody operated and that's what everybody did, I assumed that they were all correct. And what people tell you in focus groups, qualitative groups, for example, to explain their behavior and predict their behavior was an accurate reflection of that person's behavior and their intentions. And it wasn't until I kind of hit this brick wall in T-Mobile, Deutsche Telekom, where I had research results that just didn't make sense. And I genuinely didn't know what to do with this research. You know, personally, it was a risk to say it's a waste of money. But somebody introduced me to Decode Marketing, which was founded by a neuroscientist and a psychologist. And I invited them in and started talking to them about this research. And they immediately said, but you do realize that the methodology is fundamentally flawed. And that was, wow, what are you telling me? This is a piece of work that many businesses use globally and have done for years, run by one of the world's biggest research companies. And you're telling me the methodology is flawed? And then they explained why it was flawed. And that was a major challenge to me, to suddenly be talking to people from a very different field, not business. They'd come from science and academia, and they had been studying human behavior for decades, as those fields have: social psychology, cognitive psychology, more recently neuroscience and behavioral economics. And what they started to tell me made sense. And I tested them out with a few things, and the more they talked to me, the more I realized that they had a completely new perspective on human behavior, consumer behavior. And it showed that many of the methods that I had used, many of the mental models that I had grown up with and assumed were correct, were in fact wrong. Some of them were slightly okay, but also had problems. And that was difficult to hear, because you know, when you've grown up, spent 25 years doing things one way, and then someone comes and tells you that might not be the best way to do it, that's a big challenge. And I now know that human beings have an inbuilt resistance to that. It even has a name. It's called the Semmelweis reflex. It's the tendency for us to reject new information if that conflicts with or challenges our mental models and our paradigms and our beliefs. So we resist it. And that's why change management in business per se is so difficult, because we stick with what we know because it's familiar and it's less risky, and change is inherently risky for human beings. And so change management, and I faced change management right there and then with these guys telling me the research you've done is flawed and there is a different way based on science. That that was a major turning point for me after 25 years.
Well, that's a powerful thing, and I think this is something that is recurrent in everything that happened right now in these areas of digital marketing and consumer behavior, because the changes are going so fast. So before we go, and actually you reflect that in the book and a lot of things we're talking, but one question I have, so you work with some of the biggest organizations worldwide, and this is actually, like you said, there's a component of, first of all, politics in terms of organizations, understanding the different goals of the different departments. It's like an orchestra. You have to be part of a balanced music, otherwise the music gets a bit out of control. So from that experience in the corporate, before even talking about Decoded, which is an important concept, there's a process of coding and decoding and a lot of things with your management, but as well, especially when you manage a big corporation that have departments in sometimes hundreds of countries, it's a quite substantial challenge. So can you just, I don't know, share with us what would be probably some of the, let's say, one or two things that you thought there would be like the common ground in all the different organizations? Because looking at your profile, we have, just for people listening to us, we're talking about Vice President Consumer Business for T-Mobile, which is one of the biggest mobile corporations in the planet. Group Marketing Director for First Choice Holidays. E-Capabilities Director for Diageo, which is one of the biggest drinking companies in the planet. And as well, marketing roles in Unilever. So these four alone are four of the biggest corporations in the planet, and especially in terms of consumer behavior, there's nothing bigger than this. So how would be like summary, what would be the kind of learnings for especially for people listening to us that you got out of this corporate experience?
Well, I think the main one, and in my experience, Unilever and Diageo did this in the most strong way of the companies I've worked with, is the understanding that brands are the lifeblood of the business, because brands are what bring in the revenue, and brands are a guarantee of future earnings stream, an income stream. And recognizing that brands have a fundamental value to the business that often is in excess of the physical assets of a business. So the brand represented by goodwill or intangible assets is this sort of equity that is very precious and needs to be managed very carefully. But realizing that is your most important asset, realizing that the only way brands operate is in the brain. That's it. You know, they are a set of associations in the brain of people who will buy them. That gives you two very powerful things. It puts brands front and center of the business, and consumers or shoppers or customers or whatever you want to call them, the clients who will pay money to buy your brand. That really means that marketing has a fundamental and central role in the business. Many businesses I see, the role of marketing is almost secondary. It's like you do the advertising, that's it, you know, or marketing does the acquisition, the short-term response-based marketing, performance marketing, and that's it. But the way I've seen that working most strongly is where you make the whole ethos of marketing, which is about creating something that people value and that they will want to buy that value. They will give you their money in return for that value. That makes that whole mentality makes the business much more focused and ultimately much more successful.
So, and this success, this is a key element, and I think I feel the same as you're doing. So from this experience with these corporations and then creating your own marketing agency, which is specialized on these areas, can you tell us a bit that history? Because of course, I'm sure that you create marketing agency looking and solving problems that you face on your corporate level, which is partly what I do as well with my creation of Studium. And a lot of things I do here is that, but in my case, I was always an entrepreneur. In your case, you work with big corporations, which should deal levels. And as well, I feel that in the business right now is that there's kind of a multiple dialectics, because you have the dialectics of big corporations with the legacy brands like the ones you worked. There are some of the biggest brands in the world. And then you have legacy, or not legacy, but you have like cases of new brands being created that have to coexist with these old brands. And then the consumers are looking at this. And as well, the life expansion or the life expectancy of a brand is becoming smaller because it's a velocity and you have to keep readapting and readjusting, but you have to keep the narrative around the branding. So I would like to see your thoughts on this.
Well, I think the common denominator through all of that is human behavior, because marketing is fundamentally about behavior change. You want someone to buy your brand. That means they exhibit or show some behavior, or you want them to switch to your brand or buy more of your brand or recommend your brand, share it on social media in some way, talk about your brand. So this is all about human behavior. That's what fundamentally lies at the heart of marketing. And the transition that I faced and that I managed was working with these guys from Decode, who introduced totally new concepts to understand human behavior, so neuroscience and cognitive and social psychology, and finding ways to leverage what science and academia had studied for decades and apply it to the commercial world. I think that was the biggest change that I've faced. And I ended up talking more and more to these guys. They recommended some books for me to read. And in the end, I just thought, this is too important, too fundamental to marketing not to embrace it. So I actually said to them, would you be interested in having a UK office, because they were based in Germany, and I'd like to work with you. And so they said, yeah, if you want to set it up, we'll coach you, and you can set up Decode Marketing in the UK, which is what I did. But what it means is this is a new way of understanding behavior, and it doesn't really matter whether you're marketing a product or a service, whether you have a physical business or a digital business. The fundamentals of human behavior are the same, and they are universal. Now, of course, the channels change, the way we do stuff, how we do stuff changes. So, clearly, the internet has disrupted and evolved channels in a way that we couldn't have imagined 20 or 30 years ago, and continues to do so. But what drives people, what motivates people, hasn't changed. Let me give you an example. So one of the basic drivers of human behavior is the goal. And the goal is a term that comes from science, and striving to achieve goals. Is goals of excitement. Excitement is based around the novelty-seeking system in the brain. So curiosity, change, vitality, creativity, and fun. So we can meet those goals online or offline, and we buy products and services to help us meet those particular goals. Other goals are to do with autonomy. This is about my self-esteem, my pride, my self-confidence, feeling that I'm doing my best. And again, we can meet those through the purchase of premium and luxury brands. We can also do it online by being perceived as an expert in a certain area, for example, within a community or a group. And so what hasn't changed is the core basic human motivation. What has changed are the ways in which we can achieve those goals, so physical or digital channels. And this is what I mean by leveraging science. So not only new ways of understanding consumer behavior, but also leveraging that in very practical applications. So how can we help people achieve goals in whether it's excitement or autonomy, to use those two examples? How do we position our brand, whether it's a product or a service, whether it's physical or digital, to help achieve those? Because fundamentally, that's what motivates people.
Yeah, and this is actually the critical element right now for I would say anything in business. So let's look at Decoded. So Decoded is a company that is quite scientific driven. Is a German and international organization. So tell us about the organization as well, because it's a non-conventional agency, which I think it's important for people listening to us. And it's one of the things I'm particularly interested to talk, because a lot of people in marketing think, okay, there's people, I think everyone understands sales, even if they don't know how to do it, especially in our times. It's more difficult than ever to do right sales. But doing marketing is about behavioral, is about science, increasingly anything in business, increasingly about data and behavior. And this is one of the things you talk about the book, and you go in there. But agencies like yours, there's not a lot. So I would like to touch what is the agency, how it works, and as well some of the case studies that you want to share with us.
Sure. Yeah, and that's what really attracted me Well, what attracted me to the agency was this new understanding, new lens through which to look at human behavior, but also applying it practically. So our team, I think, is quite unique. We have the company started with scientists and academics, and one of the issues with scientists and academics is they grow up in science and academia. They have their own language, they have their own way of working, and they're very different to the commercial world. So what our team has done over time is to build a mixed team of scientists and academics on one hand, but also commercial practitioners on the other. So people like me, right? I'm never going to be a neuroscientist to the level that my colleagues are. They're all minimum PhD level. But if I can understand some of the basic principles, then I can help apply it to marketing. And so our team is interdisciplinary. It comprises not just the scientists and academics, but people like me who have a brand marketing background. We have 2 people who come from advertising agencies. So they had planning roles. They happen to have psychology degrees as well, which of course helps. We have people with a shopper marketing background. We have in our research team, because we do a lot of quantitative research, we have people from some of the big research agencies as well. And we have other people like me who've been clients of Decode and then quit their client role to join Decode. So we have someone in the US who joined from Procter & Gamble. We have someone in Germany who was the head of research for Beiersdorf. We have a couple of people who joined us from Henkel. So we've got this lovely mixture of the leading edge understanding of behavior from an academic and scientific point of view, and then the very practical, let's roll our sleeves up and sell more stuff. So how do we leverage science and apply it? So that's what the company, what the agency looks like. We operate in consultancy, quantitative research. We do a lot of training and capability development. So introducing principles of behavioral science to brand teams, to sales teams, to shopper and category teams, to agencies, creative agencies as well. And more recently, and I think one of the changes that is going to accelerate without doubt, more recently, we have set up a sister company to build AI tools that are founded not just on behavioral science principles, but more importantly, trained with human response data. So we have AI tools that, for example, can predict where someone will pay attention in an ad, a digital, video, or static ad, or a pack design, with nearly 99% accuracy compared to getting a sample of real humans and putting eye tracking glasses on them. So the machine can do it in minutes, and you don't need humans anymore. I mean, it's quite amazing. And it can do it like that because it's been trained with over 15,000 hours of human eye tracking data. So the machine has learned what attracts attention. So I think developments like that are going to become increasingly important. You know, there's a lot of hype around things like Chat GPT right now, and being able to generate text, stories, narratives, or whatever, just using AI, and also generative AI. So I've seen some incredible examples of Nike trainers that have been designed by AI, or pack designs just generated by AI. And this will open huge new fields of exploration, I think, in the next few years.
So this is an area that, well, is very dear to me because I'm working as well in the AI. I think everyone is working AI if you're in business. There's no other way. So let me ask one thing before going to your book, and your book touches a lot of these things. So in terms of, you just touched that a lot of things right now are going to be created by AI. But there's 2 elements that come here. There's the kind of I would say the invisible interaction that we all use, we all have as consumers with our devices, with our websites and different things, which is already the last 10 years has been already increasingly digital and as well driven by data and very basic systems of machine learning. But now we are integrating, especially in the last couple of years, and especially this year is going to be the breakthrough, a bit of sentient chatbots and different areas like that. So this is going to be creating I think first will be a big chaos, not a big chaos, but as well is going to be creating a new level. Actually, there's a concept that I'm working on when I hear that is actually from another German expert, Gerd Leonard. He spoke about digital obesity. And I would say that right now, this is going to create a lot of different areas that is, I put it in multiple layers. So you have digital governance, digital literacy, the digital obesity, of course, digital laziness, and digital cynicism. And I always remember that when I work, I only had the corporate job that I can say that was a proper corporate job. And I remember that at the time, and this was 10 years ago plus, one of my leaders, he was kind of managing a lot of digital budgets and all the digital tools, but he actually didn't use any of these tools on himself because he was afraid of the data and all these different things. So we have a lot of I think what I'm trying to say here is we have a big challenge right now. And for instance, Germany, where actually your agency is the headquarters, it's quite a complex country just when it comes to data. So how do you see these challenges, especially because with this kind of layers, we're going to create, for instance, you guys are ahead of the curve and the rest of the world is not even understanding this, although everyone is using it. You just need to have a phone to use it. So from your research, and especially this is actually a challenge I see from governments, big corporations, is understanding how fast this goes, and second, how influential and disruptive this is. Because it's, for instance, like right now, the biggest discussion is Google going to be disrupted by ChatGPT? How that is going to adapt? And of course, bear in mind that a huge part of the world advertisement is managed by Google. This is quite a challenging challenging statement, and this happened in a couple of months. In a company that is actually quite still in an inception, although very strong. So how do you see this from a perspective most of the Decoded agency, and what be the top level guidance you give to brands and to your clients and the ecosystem?
Yeah, so the use that we're putting AI to is quite specific, and I think the other issues you're raising are obviously significant, but they're sort of meta issues, and I don't think anyone knows how they will play out and what legislation or governance might be necessary with privacy and data or whatever. So the use that we are putting AI to, as I said, is quite specific. So training AI with human data on things like attention, as I mentioned, but also, interestingly, on human response to text and imagery. So let me give you an example. If I showed you a photograph of a sunflower, you would tell me, well, that's a sunflower. I know that because of the shape and the color and the petals and the seeds and things like that. And you would then maybe talk about the sunflower oil and sunflower seeds. And then you may also say, well, it's also linked conceptually with things like sunshine, which is about outdoors, health, optimism, uplifting, happiness, things like this. So when humans see a sunflower, all of these mental associations are activated because that's what we've learned are associated with sunflowers over many years. So we have trained our AI model with human response data like that to more than 400 million different images, and also trained it with corpuses of text as well. So if a client gives us an image, which could be an advertisement, a print ad, it could be a digital ad, it could be a pack design, or a key visual for shopper marketing, our AI will immediately say what concepts are activated by this. So if it was a field of sunflowers in the image, then you would get out of the AI exactly what I've just told you. But of course, there are images that are much more complex that may have people in them, or people and objects, and they might be doing things, and they're dressed in certain ways in certain settings, etc., etc. So the AI has been trained to decode all of that imagery and say, what at an implicit level, what is conveyed by that? What associations are activated by that particular image? So what this means for clients is they can, and because it's so fast and also relative to other research, it's incredibly cheap and very cost effective. I shouldn't say cheap, I should say cost effective, shouldn't I? But it is cheap compared to other forms of research. And because it's so fast, it means that clients can test a lot of assets that they may not have had the time or the budget to test in the past. And particularly where clients are generating many bits of content on a daily basis. And normally, none of that gets tested unless you're a big business with big budgets. But for the vast majority of businesses, you don't have the time or the money or the people to optimize before you go out with that piece of content, before it gets aired, before it goes out to market or gets viewed by somebody. So this enables you to have a very quick step before that happens, before you spend your production money, before it gets eyeballs and views, and make sure that the creative is optimized so that it's as, we call it brain friendly. So it's as brain friendly as possible. Is it going to convey the message that I intended? Are the associations or brand values that I want to convey, are those activated by this image or the text that I'm using? And if not, what should I do about it? So that's the sort of specific use that we're using AI for. We've got many clients already globally using this for advertising, both digital and physical, for pack design testing, for shopper marketing, visual testing, promotions, and finding that it's incredibly useful. It doesn't replace people. It sits alongside the marketing team or whichever team wants to use it, and it helps augment their own intelligence. We've got one client who's even now integrated it into their digital asset management system so that every piece of content goes through this AI step as a check, and they have a dashboard, and it shows them within minutes, can this go out to market or not? And if not, where do I need to optimize? Where do I need some sort of creative intervention to improve it in order to make it work as effectively as possible? So I think that sort of use of AI is, as an ex-market client-side marketeer myself, is incredibly exciting and incredibly valuable as well. And I think that's certainly going to be the future for the next few years.
I subscribe, and it's going to be increasing more complex, but as well more exciting because there's a lot of opportunities if you use it right. So let's go to your book, and I think for people listening to us, we're going to highlight, but here it is, Decoded, The Science Behind Why We Buy, by Phil Barden, with a foreword by Rory Sutherland. And he has a fantastic contribution for a lot of people. So Phil, what a lot of things you have in the book is about decision science. And I think if I go through some of the titles that, for me, some of my notes that I have here, the decision science, that's a very important concept. And as well, the moment of truth. I think this is a key element for decisions and for business. And for me, I have multiple hats, but as a business person, these decision times are really increasingly more important. And as well, the optimizing the path to purchase. So I don't know if you want to summarize some of these things. I really recommend for marketeers listening to us and technologists to read the book and get information. There's a lot of generosity here and a lot of fantastic research. So I'll pass the word to you, summary on this.
Thank you. Yeah, I think for me, one of the key principles in this is understanding that all of our brains, and when I say all, I mean universally, and there's no difference between if you're in B2C or B2B, you know, we all have the same brain. They all follow the same process when arriving at a decision. So we firstly need to get information into the brain. So we need to pay attention to that, and understanding some of the attentional and perceptual processes is crucial, because often in marketing, we focus on things like what's the emotional benefit. And we lose sight of the fact that actually we've got to get into the brain in the first place. So understanding things like perception and framing of information. And framing is an interesting concept, because depending on how information is presented to us, or a thing, a service or a product is presented to us, it then changes how we perceive that object or that information. I'll give you an example. You can have two identical bits of meat. One is labeled 90% fat-free. The other is labeled 10% fat. People will judge them very differently, even though objectively, rationally, they are identical. 90% fat-free is exactly the same as 10% fat, but people perceive the 90% fat-free meat to be better quality, to be healthier, better for you, and they're willing to pay more for that. Which sounds crazy, because it's the same as the other meat, but it's framed differently. We had another example, which I give in the book, of a client who was testing a face cream, and they wanted to test different types of cream. And to do that, they sent these out for market testing in unbranded jars. And when we got the results back from different cities, this was in Germany, one city stood out as being anomalous. The results were very different to everywhere else. And when we asked the client if there was more detail they could tell us, they said, oh yes, we remember now, we ran out of the jar. So we had to pack the cream in a different shaped jar. It was still unbranded, but it was a different shape. And simply the fact that the jar shape was different framed the cream differently, and hence people's perception of the cream was significantly different. So understanding some of those processes is crucial. So once we get into the brain through attention, the next process is intuition or understanding, and how the brain decodes the incoming stimulus to give it meaning. And then once we've given it meaning, it's almost like the brain is saying, what is it? What does it represent? Where do I know this from? Through searching its associative memories that it's built over many years. And only then do we then get motivation. And this is where the brain is saying, what's in it for me? Do I approach this or do I avoid it? Is there something interesting there, something relevant and valuable for me? And then if all of those process steps align, then we will get a purchase decision. So that's one of the key concepts in the book. The other is understanding that the purchase decision itself, and this is based on some neuroscientific research, is based on two things: reward and pain. When we perceive a brand, the so-called reward center in the brain is activated, which also happens when we see something that's very pleasurable that we want. So a brand is something inherently pleasurable and valuable. It's rewarding for us. But that's not enough, because the other side of this, what we call the net value equation, is pain. And pain is represented by the expected price and also the behavioral cost. So the time and the effort involved in a purchase. How effortful is it? And can you carry something if it's a physical product? How many clicks is it on a path to purchase? These are all pain points for the brain. And if the perceived or expected reward is enough to overcome the perceived or expected pain, then we will buy. And if it's not, then we won't buy. And that's a very basic principle of reward minus pain. And that's why when you see something like Amazon one click, that's a really beautiful way of understanding how to minimize the pain side of this equation, because they've taken behavioral cost away. It is literally one click. No, hardly any time, hardly any effort. You compare that to other e-commerce paths to purchase, and you can see why people get drop-off rates of very high drop-off rates, and on certain pages, people drop out as well. And when you analyze that, and we do this a lot for clients looking at their path to purchase, when you analyze it, it becomes obvious why people give up. They just can't be bothered, because there's much more important things to do in life than spend your time, invest your time in a difficult to follow, unintuitive path to purchase. So those, I think, are two of the real fundamental things. The other final thing that I found probably the most valuable, given my previous career, is the understanding that human motivation is goal oriented. So we are motivated to achieve goals, and goals can be and are a mixture of functional things, which are literally, I'm thirsty, I'm hungry, or I've got dirty laundry that needs cleaning, or I need broadband, or I need transportation. Very, very important that a brand product or service delivers that, because if it doesn't, you won't have a business for very long. So there's functional goals that we are trying to achieve, but there's also another level of goal which is more implicit, which is a neuropsychological level. And this explains why we buy the brands that we do. Because if it weren't the case, we'd all buy the same brands, because they would all mean the same to everybody. We'd buy the same watches, the same clothes, the same cars, whatever it might be. But of course we don't, because we've come to learn and build associations with them from all of our experiences, through things we've learned, things we've heard, things we've witnessed, things that we've experienced ourselves, that brands stand for different things. And that's why that's the essence of brands, really. It's this delivering this mixture of goal achievement at a functional level and at a neuropsychological level. And that's more about social goals or emotional goals or psychological goals that might have to do with, for example, a sense of closeness, warmth, and belonging, or it might be a sense of courage and risk and rebellion, or power, self-esteem, superiority and pride, or fun, innovation, change, variety, whatever it might be. And what I have in the book is a model that is complete, in the sense that it has all of the goals, universal goals that cross categories, that cross countries, that cross demographies as well. And that, for me, was a real beautiful learning from the fields of behavioral science. We don't have to reinvent this. It's done. These scientists and academics have studied this for decades and documented the goals. And thank you. We can use them to understand how brands are positioned, how we can grow in terms of relevance and distinctiveness, what needs to change in order to evoke behavior change. And the real proof of that for me was the relaunch of T-Mobile, which Decode worked on with me. So we quantitatively identified a set of goals that we wanted to associate with the brand. And having done that, and that's something that we do day in, day out around the world for clients, is actually this brand growth opportunity identification at a quantitative level. Having done that, we were able then to develop a brand positioning and a creative brief, an advertising or communications platform, which was Life is for Sharing, that if we could bring that to life and manifest it well enough, the theory was people would then buy T-Mobile and switch to T-Mobile. And Saatchi's, the agency, did bring it to life brilliantly, firstly in the UK with something called the Dance TV ad, which was a flash mob at London's Liverpool Street station, where you starts with a couple of people dancing and ends up with about 400 people in the middle of the station all doing the same dance. And that one ad doubled footfall into T-Mobile stores within 48 hours of going on air, and grew sales by nearly 50%. And frankly, it took us all by surprise. in the company, we just hadn't anticipated that sort of response. And the guys in Decode were not surprised. They were surprised that we were surprised. They said to me, well, why are you surprised? Because you know that in that ad, we have encoded motivators of behavior, certain goal achievement. And what the ad has done is bring it to life. So why are you surprised when people respond? And that for me was the real wow moment. And then we replicated that across Europe with the same communication platform, but different executions with similar effect. And so that was, for me, was the real proof that this whole behavioral science thing was fundamentally important, because it gets at the heart of marketing, which is behavior change.
Well, that's super insightful, and thank you for sharing that wisdom with us. It's really impressive, and I love the way you summarize it, and as well, especially the importance of looking at these things, because in the end of the day, we always forget. Like you said in your book, is a lot of the things is the behavioral change and influence the purchase decisions in business and behavioral marketing, but actually in business development, let's put it that way. But these decisions are still very important. So let me ask one question without going so technical. So one of the things is, I think you and me are partly researchers that love what to do, and I see your passion, and I have the same, and I share this. But a lot of people get lost when I go to technical. So let's look here. I'm sure that when you are dealing with executives, especially consulting, you have very sophisticated individuals and less sophisticated. Some people are more instinctive, and we have to pass the message in a more simplistic way. So if we're talking right now in a team, we want to motivate a team of sales or business or marketing in terms of this behavioral decision. So what would be the steps you would do for this team? Because I think that's the million or multi-billion dollars question, is that how you bring this to your team first. Because if you're in a big corporation, of course, you can actually tailor a department. But if you're in a small SME or in a small marketing or in a small startup, which is 90% of the world economy, you have other kind of challenges. And most of these challenges, even in the big corporations, is how you motivate your teams. I've been working with multi-billion dollars groups and small groups. The challenges are all the same. And as well, how you build this narrative into the culture of the company. And in terms of the bridge, because one of the things I feel more is, I repeat this to my team very often, is the strength of your ecosystem, or the strength of your ecosystem is the strength of your business. So it's about how you build first with your team and out. But this kind of decision science, it's critical first to our teams, and then secondly to our consumers.
So the way we always start is by asking questions and about big marketing failures and successes, and asking people if they can explain why. So as an example, Tropicana orange juice redesigned some years ago their carton design, and being part of a big corporation, they researched it very thoroughly, qualitatively and quantitatively, and it passed, the new design passed all of their action standards. So they relaunched, they put it on shelf, and they lost $27 million in sales within 6 weeks. And they had to withdraw the new design from sale. And so the question is, why? Why did research say that was going to succeed, and yet it completely failed on shelf? So that's an example of one question. Another question, also in consumer products, when Dove relaunched in skincare with the campaign for real beauty, using real women in their advertising, it was a massive success, and they rolled that out globally. And they assumed that idea, campaign for real beauty and real women in advertising, would work powerfully when they extended Dove into other categories. So they tried it in hair care, and it completely failed. Why? So I always start off asking questions like that, and people have theories, people have hypotheses as to why it may or may not have happened. And then I introduce things like the meat example, 90% fat-free versus 10% fat, and a few other examples that just get people to realize wow, there's some weird stuff going on here. Yeah, for example, did you know if when you're shopping in a supermarket and you walk down the aisle that has that sells wine, if there is music playing that is French, typical sort of French cafe accordion style music, the vast majority of wine sold will be French. And if the music is German, like brass band type music, sales will switch to German wine. And if you play classical music, the average price paid per bottle will go up. So I always start by telling people these phenomena and asking them these questions, and that opens the door to, all right, this could be interesting. Let's listen. And then you can take them on a bit of a journey through behavioral science. But I always relate it back to the person. So, and I'll give you another example. In the book builds on Professor Daniel Kahneman's Nobel Prize winning work on decision making, and Kahneman talks about these two systems of mental processes, system 1 and system 2. System 1 being much more automatic, spontaneous, intuitive, fast, geared for action, and system 2 being controlled and reflective and a lot slower and more effortful. And I then go on to say that the vast majority of our decision making is system 1. And I presented this at a car manufacturer, and the finance director said to me, I don't believe it. I really don't believe this, because when I ordered my new car recently, I had to make trade-offs. I had a budget, and I traded off against the model car I could have, and the engine size, and the trim, and the specification, and all of that was a very deliberate, reflective, controlled process. So it was system 2. And I said, yeah, you're absolutely right. What you've just described is system 2. But why did you go through that deliberate process? And he said, oh, so that I could have a BMW outside my house. So what he just described is actually the decision had already been made by his system 1, because BMW has associations that he wanted to share. And it said something about him. It made him feel in a certain way. And then his system 2 engaged to rationalize the decision and make sure that he got the best option that he could for the budget that he could. So making it personal, bringing it back to things that are relevant to people, that they recognize from their own decision making, from their day-to-day purchases, is a really powerful way to get people's attention, to get people to listen to and start to understand the whole behavioral science foundation.
Oh, that's very, very impressive, and it's really the way you put that narrative and the way you pass it through. So I know that we are passing the 1 hour gap. That is my normal benchmark, which I appreciate as your time as well. So let's look at the book. So you just touched the emotional component in some of the examples you mentioned. So some of the things you have is, for instance, I think one chapter that's quite interesting is from position to touch points, and then you have why emotion doesn't help, and there's even, for instance, a couple of infographics that I recommend people to look in the book, where you have, for instance, enjoyment, excitement, adventure, autonomy, discipline, and security. So let's, if you could, and I think the team will put it more visual, but this graphic is quite interesting because I love this, because in the end, this touches all the different areas, but it's very difficult to put this working together. So if you could share some of behavioral scientific study that you reflect as on the book.
Sure. So what you've just described is the model that we use for goals. So what motivates humans? So those 6 fields you mentioned: autonomy, discipline, security, enjoyment, excitement, and adventure are universal, and within them are a number of goals at a more granular level. So that's very useful when you to work with a brand positioning versus where the category in which the brand operates is positioned, where your competitors are positioned. And this is all stuff that can be measured quantitatively as well, using what we call implicit testing. which gets to the system 1 response in the brain. So that's that graphic that you mentioned. When it comes to emotion, I think there's a lot of confusion in the advertising and marketing world, because everyone says, well, we want to feel positive, we want our customers to be happy, and therefore a logical consequence of that is we want advertising that makes people feel emotional. So they could feel sad or they could feel happy. But what's confusing about that, and what is potentially dangerous about that, is that there are millions of different ways of making an advert that makes people cry or laugh or feel happy. But what's right for the brand? Because, to give you an example, and I give this example in the book, Cadbury, the confectionery business, had a famous advert many years ago which featured a gorilla drumming to the Phil Collins track In the Air Tonight. And it was written to a brief of rediscover the joy. And the joy in that sense was the anticipation and expectation of the gorilla leading up to this amazing drumming, and the exhilaration and the exuberance felt by the gorilla. And that got talked about, got shared. It was, from a social media point of view, hugely successful. And the company then produced a follow-up ad to the same brief, Rediscover the Joy, and that was called Trucks. And this had vehicles racing each other around an airport and competing. Now, it didn't do as well in terms of consumer response, which seems strange because it was written to the same brief. It had the same creative team and director, I understand, but it just performed very differently. But when you look at joy from using the goal model, you can understand why, because the joy of winning, which is joyful, if winning is what motivates you, looks and feels very different to the joy of sitting down with a good book and a cup of coffee, or the joy of parenthood, or the joy of discovering something, or the joy of watching your favorite team play well. They are all joy. They all make you feel joy, which is the outcome. But the advertisement that would lead to that and cause that outcome would be very, very different depending on what type of joy you're talking about. So for us, we always say, focus on the goal that you want to convey and activate. And the emotional response you get, if you do that correctly, will be positive. People will feel good or feel happy or feel joy. But don't use that as the input. Use that as the desired outcome. You know, if I'm playing tennis competitively and I want to win, and I am winning, then I feel good. I feel happy. I feel joyful. If I'm playing tennis to win and I'm losing, I feel angry, frustrated, sad. So the point is here that the goal is winning. The goal isn't joy or anger or frustration or happiness or sadness or surprise or whatever it might be. It's not the emotional outcome. The goal is what drives the outcome. So that's a very important distinction, and why we always work with this 6-field goal model to say to clients, understand what goals to associate with your brand. And if you can deliver that through all of your touch points, whatever they may be, then you will get the emotional response that you desire. The emotion is like a feedback mechanism to the brain. It's not the motivator itself. It's a feedback on the extent to which you are meeting your goal or not. Like the tennis example, if I'm meeting my goal, I feel something. If I'm not meeting my goal, I feel a different emotion. And it helps us learn. It helps us change and do something differently.
No, it's really completely very powerful and emotional, but as I would say, inspiring part of how you deal with this. So I know that we passed the time a bit forward, so I want to thank you, Phil, for this. I really suggest, and you're going to have as well a small summary of the book in the Books ABC series, but I really love the book, and thank you so much for your time, Phil. There will be probably I might bring you to another session, probably with multiple different people talking about decision making and marketing and AI, because it's an area that we have. So I think to wrap up, so where can people find you? I know that you are an executive in a very premium agency, but I'm sure a lot of people can learn with you, and I'm sure that you do as well some parts where people can find more information. The book is the most important, but a bit other information, where can people find it?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I'd be very happy to connect with people on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn or on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @Phil Barden. Or if you want to email me directly, phil@Decode Marketing. That's all one word, decodemarketing.com. And yeah, happy to continue the conversation.
Thank you so much. Real fantastic. And the book is really amazing. Please have a look at the book, research whatever you can. At the end of the day, books change lives and improve business. So go for it. Thank you so much, Phil. And thank you all for listening to us.
Thanks. Been a pleasure.
Thank you.